calling it code injection in Notepad, causing remote code execution, but I think that is misleading. It's really just a missing pop-up warning in the UI, and it is due to feature bloat, unnecessary product features added to Notepad that no one needs or no one asked for. When you open the advisory here, the first thing you see is the absolutely atrocious CVSS 3.1 that serves mostly to confuse folks rather than be helpful. So you see it's telling us there's RCE, max severity important, command injection. Fine, but what does that actually mean? The vector string here for most people is not helpful, and then there's a massive table that isn't actually clear. You can spend 10 minutes reading through this, but it doesn't actually tell you what the vulnerability is. And so instead, we'll go to some of the write-ups on GitHub. The first one here suggests a proof of concept of what the vulnerability is. And it's in when you render Markdown. So you can save a file as .md for Markdown, and in Markdown, you can show a link to a URL that can be an executable, a bash script, and it could be local, or it could be a remote script. And so the vector here is you would have to download a Markdown file, then you would have to click at the bottom of Notepad, you have to click this to actually turn this Markdown into a rendered Markdown, so you would just see the link itself and not where it's going. Then you would still have to control click on this link, and that would take you to either execute this locally, or in the case of where it's fetching something external, it would fetch that, and still it would then pop up, Windows itself would pop up saying like, hey, do you actually want to execute this? This is how it looks like when it's rendered. Now, more than anything, this is typically a social engineering vector for folks that might not be very technical. So for example, you would send that to, let's say, like an elderly person, and you would say like, hey, like your Apple payment is late. We're about to close your Apple account. Unless you click here and go to the Apple website, and you would make the URL format as like www.apple.com. And you would say like, you need to control click and then accept all prompts after that. In the case of the second line, is this actually command execution? Not really. You're actually just opening command prompt. That's it. What if you actually wanted to execute a command? Now you can't actually pass as an argument. You cannot pass commands here. It wouldn't work. So the alternative to actually execute arbitrary commands is you either have to have a local batch file or PowerShell script bundled with this. And so they basically download a zip file. You have this Markdown file, and next to it, you have like a PowerShell script or an executable, whatever. And then the Markdown would just link and run the other executable, or you would fetch it remotely. Now, did they prevent this feature? Not really, and we'll see what the fix was. Now, separately, there's this really good write-up by Patchpoint. This is the most detailed one I found. So it says that Notepad between 11.0 and 11.2510 is vulnerable. And in Notepad, you can click on settings and it'll show you what version you have. They show you an example proof of concept, and worth noting that this is not just for Markdown. This can also be triggered by just the link formatter. And there's this good tweet here by Joe saying that you don't actually need Markdown. You can just write text, click on the formatter. All done with that in a second. And here, it's the same thing. You can just link to anything you want the same way. And so here, as an example, you control click, and it pops calc or command prompt. Now, again, this is not actually command execution. You would instead have to specify like a local batch file or PowerShell file. And I like that here they do conclude that it is a inefficient attack vector. I mean, like, if you need a local file to run it, you can just tell them to click that directly in the email. And if you did try to fetch from a remote source and run, like in here, it's a batch file, .bat, you still get the security warning here. We know many people don't read this, but there is a warning. Now in here, they say that there are ways where you might bypass the warning prompt here. So some of the protocols or schemes you specify could get around it and execute without showing that warning. And overall, it kind of depends on the schema here. So in this case, they specify file, but you could specify other things depending on what's installed on this machine. And each one would behave differently. But as an attacker, typically, unless it's targeted, you don't really know what's going to be installed, so it won't work for everyone. Fine, now let's try to run it locally on the version that is fixed and see how the behavior is. So here is the first example, which is just a markdown file. So this is saved locally under test.md. And the first thing you have to do is click at the bottom to format it, to render the markdown. Then you have to control click on this, and then you see a pop-up. This is the fixed version of Notepad. So this is the intended behavior that is not RCE-able. And it's the same thing. It just pops up saying like this may be unsafe, and you click yes. And then you see calc. So what was the fix? They just added the pop-up. Now, just to test, we'll show the same thing as a normal link, like unrelated to Markdown. And you can also link to a fake Apple website. So you type in whatever you want, and then you just click on the link thing, and you tell it to link to same as before, like command prompt or calc, just like that. I mean, ideally, it's just a script that actually does something, not just calc. And same thing, you have to control click, and it pops up calc. In this case, it didn't even warn me. Yeah, brand new window, and still it just pops whatever I want without actually warning me. They should be showing a warning dialog anyway here. But my main issue with this is, who does this vulnerability target? So it's mostly social engineering vector, because even in the fix, they're not removing the functionality to link to executables. They're just adding one additional warning prompt on top of the usually you would already get another warning prompt. And so it's mostly targeting vulnerable people who are not very tech savvy, who are going to fall for a social engineering attempt in an email where someone to ask them to download the file. Now, in most of those cases, if you can get them to do this, you can already get them to do the same thing directly through email. So it's mostly targeting folks that wouldn't know what Markdown is. But my main issue with this is, who needs Markdown rendering and link rendering in Notepad? Everyone uses other text editors like VS Code or Sublime or Notepad++. And so who's this for? And my main issue is that Notepad was great because, well, it's made by Microsoft. They're making an operating system. Why would an operating system manufacturer make a text editor? Well, there is a valid use case, which is when you're a sysadmin and you want to change a config file real quick. Maybe it's a new machine. You don't want to go and download a text editor just to make a quick change. And so you'll just use Notepad to make a quick config change on a local file. Great, that's fine. There is a valid use case to have a text editor. Now, why does it need features like Markdown rendering and AI? Like, why is there even Copilot here? And if you go on settings, like, there's just all of these things that you can turn off, like formatting, like spell check. I mean, that could be fine, I guess. Copilot, but I don't really need these. If I needed them, that I would get a more feature-rich text editor made for all of these. I just want Notepad to just show me and allow me to edit ASCII characters and nothing else. And so my main issue with this is that people are calling it RCE. I barely think it is, but either way, it's abuse of functionality that no one needs, that no one asked for, that is not really useful to anyone. Why was it even added? Notepad was great. So sometimes you make software and it's great. It works fine. There's nothing really to improve on. But they still did. It means like there's some product director that owns Notepad under them at Microsoft that said, like, well, how can we drive our own metrics up? How can I improve my performance review? How can I add AI and Copilot to it? For the sole purpose of just improving how their team looks. Did they ask users? Did they have user surveys on what would you like to add to a Notepad? Certainly not. I was never asked. And the problem is just this feature bloat and slopification of all software where they want to add just rendering, more rendering, AI, just features that no one needs. Why? And to me, that is the real vulnerability, is like excessive product bloat. I don't know if there's a CWE for that. Maybe there should be. So overall, I mean, is it really command execution? I mean, it's an avenue in which you could social engineer someone to click on a few things to eventually lead to command execution in a way that you would have probably already been able to do without Notepad at all. But it's an extra avenue that's only possible because of feature bloat that's completely unnecessary.